the XR demands, the first one is tell the truth. Now the government, the ministers and the corporations not only need to tell the truth, they need to face the truth to start with and admit it to themselves before they can tell it, because at the moment they don't seem to have grasped what we've all grasped, and presumably what you're all about and what I'm part of yourselves, what we're all about is trying to change that and getting them to grasp and admit the truth. And I'm just wondering how much of what we're doing is actually going to be effective. And if you've got any ideas on why you think what we're doing is going to be effective.
Okay, yeah, fascinating question. Let me start with the last bit. How is what we're going to be doing effective? So Gail talks about that quite a lot in her talk. There's also a wonderful book called This is an Uprising, which explains a lot about how nonviolent direct action en masse can be effective. The idea in April is that we're going to cause so much trouble nonviolently, so much economic and political disruption, that they're going to have to start to notice and potentially listen and potentially take us seriously. The ultimate ambition is to try to get into a situation where we could negotiate. But that takes us to the first part of your question, which is, what reason do we have for thinking that these people are capable of facing this reality, as I'm asking us to do? Because, as you say, it's hard to tell the truth if you can't face the truth. But there, you know, I think there is some more grounds for optimism than perhaps you are inclined to feel. For example, I had the opportunity of giving a sort of briefing along with a couple of colleagues, academic colleagues, to the Environment Agency people recently, to top people in the Environment Agency. And we were extremely frank with them. I wasn't quite as blunt as I've been this afternoon, but by the time the day was over, I was getting pretty blunt. I was saying things like, you need to start thinking seriously about deep adaptation. Are you thinking about deep adaptation? And their response was somewhat encouraging to me. It was kind of along the lines of, well, yeah, we're kind of a bit nervous about that, but yeah, we have started to talk about it and think about it a bit. We are aware of the climate science projections and so on and so forth. And what we also did, I think, successfully is helped wake them up somewhat more. So that's one thing. I think we need to be talking to people in government whenever we get the opportunity. And various people in XR have been doing that in various ways. And it's very interesting that there are a number of politicians, a number of civil servants, a number of people in the media who've come to us and said, look, I know this stuff and it's really disturbing me. Can I help you? Or can I leak you some things and things like that? That's all very, very encouraging. The bottom line is that actually, while an awful lot of people in government and business and so on and so forth are still in what I call soft denial, the hard denial of climate change denial is incredibly marginal now, except in some parts of the US government. I say some parts because a lot of the US government is also totally marginal. The military are completely uninterested in Trump's climate change denialist nonsense. They are planning for the serious consequences of potential climate breakdown in the United States military right now. That actually a lot of people kind of behind closed doors, and again, often at least just in the privacy of their own heads to start with, are starting to try to face up to some of this. And we can help provide them with legitimacy and information and space and the kind of pressure that they want. I think that, so for example, Skeena was telling me earlier a very interesting story about a politician who was saying, look, we want you in Extinction Rebellion to plant some of your nonviolent tanks on our front lawns, literally, on the lawns of places where MPs live, so that the pressure is on us, so that we get kind of encouraged or even forced to do more than we've been doing. So I think you put all this together, there's some grounds for encouragement here that these kinds of radical methods, coming at it from various different angles, could be successful. So let's try.
Obviously, everybody in this room is aware of everything you talked about. Unfortunately, we're at the moment quite a small majority. It's great that the youngsters are coming on, the children doing the school strikes and so on. How can I convince people I know, particularly around about my age, of how urgent the situation is? Because they don't want to know. I mean, it's very difficult to convince them. What can I say to them, or what website can I point them to?
I would say if you've got someone who's sort of potentially a bit receptive, then try pointing them towards Gail's video or my Cambridge video. Something that I think is really quite powerful to people, and that's why I put it early in my talk, is this kind of deconstruction of the Paris Agreement. I think at some kind of vague level, a lot of people who've got some kind of idea about the situation and think, yeah, climate change is a serious problem, political leaders are trying to step up. You just take them through this sequence of reasons why Paris is going to abjectly fail, and their continued belief that we're sort of going to muddle through, it's kind of gone, basically. I've given this talk a lot of times. I've published versions of it. I've exposed it to potential criticism. I've had all sorts of criticisms, but no one has ever come back at me with any effective response to that deconstruction of Paris. I think it's comprehensive, it's undeniable. We are headed for the collapse of industrial growth civilization during this century, probably a lot earlier than that, probably within the lifetimes of most of the people in this room. That is going to happen unless some kind of extraordinary transformation occurs. And when you understand the logic of what Paris asks and what's actually going to happen, it's quite difficult to carry on just acting as though nothing has changed. I would say also for some people, there are completely different kinds of approaches that might be effective. So one thing which I think can be quite important, for example, for some people, is to work by way of fiction. That can have an effect on some people who are not necessarily as moved by facts. So a novel like Barbara Kingsolver's Flight Behavior, a novel like Starhawk's The Fifth Sacred Thing, films such as Apocalypto, The Road, Quaron's Gravity, Avatar. I think these can move and change people, especially if you put them in the right kind of context, and maybe you watch them together and then have a discussion about them afterwards or something like that. So there's a million things one could say. I think it's a really important question and quite a challenging question. I think to some extent it depends on the person. I hope those ideas might be helpful.
Whichever path we go, huge societal and technological changes are needed. Do we see it as XR movement as it stands at the moment to develop the policies that we need to address those, or is that further down the path, part of the people's assemblies or that sort of thing? Because there's a huge amount of sort of wonkish policy that we've got to develop.
To answer your question directly, I think in the final analysis, that isn't actually our responsibility. I don't think XR actually needs to do this, and the reason why is alluded to in what you said in your question, which is that the beauty of our position is that we don't need to do this because lots of this information is already out there. Loads of people are working on all sorts of brilliant stuff. You've got Zero Carbon Britain and lots of academics doing stuff and a million other things. You've got some good policy coming forward in the Labour Party now. You've had loads of good policy, obviously, for years in the Green Party. The policies, the ideas, the kind of changes are mostly out there. Arguably, they need to be in many cases radicalized, given the shortness of the timescale, given the radicalness of our demands, the 2025 target and the kind of way I was talking about earlier. And we're probably going to have to do some work on thinking about that in relation to things like, taking cars off the road and so on. But most of the ideas are already out there. What we actually need to do is empower citizens' assemblies to find the way. And those citizens' assemblies would be advised, obviously, by experts, and they would have the benefit of all sorts of kind of technical, scientific support, facilitation, etc. But in the final analysis, our idea, and this is the beauty of the third demand, is we don't have to offer all the solutions. We are confident that with the best information to support them, people can make the right decisions and come up with those solutions.
So, you talked about transformative adaptation, and I've always been quite a fan of the idea, I think it was best kind of phrased for me by Buckminster Fuller, where he said you don't create change by fighting the existing reality, you create change by creating a new reality that makes the old one obsolete. And so my sort of question is about the focus of XR and the kind of focus, especially from Roger Hallam, on people getting arrested. And the focus really is on fighting the very system that has failed us for so long, with an idea that we're going to somehow or the other use that system to create change. And would it not be perhaps more radical or more effective for XR to undertake sort of radical transformation adaptation in terms of, like, for instance, mass reforestation actions, or like planting trees in brownfield sites, things like that, as opposed to sort of appealing to the government and the existing power structures to make the changes that we so desperately need.
I love your ideas for actions. I think that those kinds of tree plantings, sort of mass guerrilla tree plantings is the way I'm hearing it, could be really powerful, both in terms of being real direct action, which could in some cases actually bed in and maybe those trees would grow, and also in terms of being something visible and provocative, which could end up, sometimes having people jailed or whatever in a good cause. But my own view is that usually the best way to end up going to jail is not by sort of trying to go to jail, but by doing something really good that you then put yourself at risk of being jailed as a result of. Look, in answer to your question, I'm a kind of both-and person. I think that we should be doing exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about, and I think that those who are moved to do that should really do it. And one of the beauties of XR, of course, is that, as Tiana was saying, because of our fairly decentralized structure, it's possible for groups forming locally or indeed nationally to take initiatives on doing that kind of thing. And that can be a real part of what we do. I also think there is a point in targeting national power structures and trying to radically change them or supplant them. Part of the point is this. The risk otherwise is that in the kind of way that the Transition Towns movement has done, we imagine that we can create an alternative culture and reality outside of the present reality without realizing how difficult a lot of that is within the confines of the present reality. So, for example, lots of things that transition towns have tried to do have been stymied by local councils who are unwilling to go along with them, or who prohibit aspects of it, and so on and so forth. I think the Transition Towns movement is hugely important and is clearly a part of trying to prepare ourselves, among other things, for a potential collapse, developing those kinds of skills and so on. But I think it's a mistake in the Transition Towns movement when people have said, as they sometimes have said, look, we can do everything that we're doing and that's all we need to do, and politics has become irrelevant. I think that's not true. And because of the scale at which we need to operate and the speed with which we need to operate, and because of the way that people can free ride using the existing system, unless we manage to get a sufficiently huge critical mass of change going on, I think it's necessary to do both. So I'm in favor of transition towns hugely. I'm a part of the transition movement in that sense. I'm in favor of your suggestions, but I'm also in favor of what we're trying to do in terms of achieving national and indeed international change in the kind of way that XR is planning to do through actions like the rebellion that's going forward. But look, that's just my opinion, and I think it's a really important discussion. We should carry on having that discussion, and especially if, as is, in many ways quite likely, if April doesn't succeed, or at least if it doesn't completely succeed, we should carry on these discussions very proactively in terms of thinking about, okay, so what do we do over the summer, what do we do in the autumn, etc. And it may well be various important changes of tack that we then want to take. So thanks.
Yes, I was actually going to ask a little bit very similar question to the gentleman there, but also to say about other groups and bringing in other groups, so other groups that may have been working for many years and could actually slip into this Extinction Rebellion. And I wanted to do a shameless plug. So this is part of adaptation that Tia and everyone was mentioning. So this is the Land Justice Network. They're working towards it's a manifesto for land reform in Britain. So this is about So these are groups, these are academics, these are farmers, these are activists that are working for people like Simon Fairley, who was a big initiator of this. Now, I'd like to hand out around, if you don't want one, please just hand it over again, but they're also doing a big land trespass as well. So this is basically about, we can't go anywhere unless we've got land to grow, land to move, land to be. So yeah, if I can, if that's okay?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. So my question was, yes, about encouraging other groups, so other direct action groups. I know the Quakers are hugely involved.
Yes.
To actually get on board with this. I'm part of about 3 or 4 other groups that have been working for many years, trying to do the same thing. So is there a vehicle, is there a way that we can get more people, more groups that have been working, that maybe have slightly different views on sort of direct action to get involved? So yeah,
Land, of course, is so crucial in terms of what we're talking about. One of the facts that's really, really important to bear in mind as we move into this period of climatic instability, continued growing human population, at least for a while, serious pressure on our food systems, massive pressure on our food systems. The likelihood that the way that collapse will happen will, if it happens, will be at least partly dependent upon food shortages and not just malnutrition, but starvation and mass migrations consequently and so forth. We need to remember that in this country we cannot feed ourselves. And that is an extremely stupid and vulnerable position to be in at a moment in history like this. That indicates a need for urgent change, especially in a country like this one, which is so densely populated. What does it mean? It means things like we need to massively reduce our food waste. We need to eat a lot lower on the food chain. We need to do the kind of planning for changed agriculture compatible with changing climatic conditions in the years to come. And thinking intelligently about the land and getting more people back onto the land, right? That's obviously going to be part of what transformative adaptation, let alone deep adaptation, involves, right? Our current food system is massively fossil fuel dependent in a way which is completely unacceptable and dangerous. In terms of how do we cooperate with these other organizations, there's loads to say there, but one just quite basic point I'd like to make is that it would be really wonderful if some of these organizations would simply come out in support of Extinction Rebellion. And there are some signs that that's starting to happen. There have been positive moves from Amnesty International and Greenpeace already, for example.
What's changed, I guess, is the question. I think you could have given this talk 10 years ago. I think we would have had the same questions. I think most of the answers would have been the same. I've been at those talks. We closed down power stations 10 years ago as Climate Camp, which was a great new movement. All the same things were said. It was fantastic. We really went for it. We did all burn out over time, and things do burn out after a while. But what's changed?
The climatic situation around the world is way worse than it was 10 years ago. Climate chaos is now really kicked in a way that it hadn't then. The biodiversity crisis is way worse than it was 10 years ago, or at least our knowledge of it is way worse. And quite a lot of what's been happening with the biodiversity crisis is simply that studies have come in the last few years to show us what's been happening for quite a long time and confirming things that people thought anecdotally when they noticed things like, how come when I drive through a natural area in summer, I don't get insects all over the windscreen anymore? That's the classic one. There's a huge change in my lifetime, but that's now been kind of confirmed and undergirded by scientific studies. So I think that actually quite a lot has changed. I think the soil has become a lot more fertile because a lot more people are waking up to the terrifying reality of just how bad things have got, and they have got a lot worse in the last decade from the biodiversity perspective and from the climate perspective. And that's partly why I think you're getting the extraordinary upsurge of the climate school strike movement, which really is something quite new. I don't see any precedent for that. Climate Camp is a sort of partial precedent for Extinction Rebellion. What Greta Thunberg has initiated, there's never been anything like that before. So although we're awfully late in the day, as they say in the Lord of the Rings, the hour is late. It's awfully late in the day. I do take some encouragement from the fact that, in the way I kind of described towards the end of my talk, as things have got worse, our consciousness has finally started to catch up with it. And what we need to hope for is that our consciousness can rise to it and then overtake it. And none of us know that that can't happen. And I think a lot of us kind of know in our hearts or in our souls that if we are determined enough, then it just might happen. It just might happen. And wow, wouldn't that be just a truly awesome thing to be a part of? This moment that we are alive in now is a really terrible moment to be alive in, and also quite a potentially wonderful one. So let's make sure it's that possibility that we realize if we possibly can. Thank you.